Hi and welcome back. A few episodes ago I showed how you could boot a VAXstation over the network off another VAXstation. Today I'm going to show you how to boot a PC off the VAXstation using remote boot. These are three of the DE200 series network cards. This is the DE201, which is AUI and twisted pair. This is the 202, which is twisted pair and thin wire, and the 205, which came out a bit later, which has got all three interfaces. In order to do a remote boot, you need the remote boot ROM, which these two cards have. I don't have the boot ROM for the 205s. Today we're going to be looking at this one in particular, the 201, and we'll get our PC to boot over the network from the VAXstation. Of course, with any old gear, it always helps to have the right manual. This is needed to explain the dip switch settings. This is the most important page of the manual. I'll just give you a quick look at that. We're going to be leaving pretty much everything at default. So memory range is 2000, 64K mode, IO 300, the timeout we'll leave, IRQ 5, and the only switch that we're going to be changing here is switch 6, which turns on and off remote boot. Well, this is the board, and the switches are here that you set the remote boot on, and the other settings. The only other thing of note is this jumper bank here. In order to switch between the AUI and the twisted pair, you just pull that up and you move it onto the other set of pins. Anyway, it's time to put it into the PC, and we'll be using, as usual, the Digital Venturus 5100, which is a great machine because it's got both ISA and PCI slots. Switching over to the VAXstation, I have installed a clean copy of 5.5-2. This is required for the version of Pathworks that I'm using. Later versions don't seem to work. The first thing you should do, just to test the remote booting of the card, is to turn on the line servicing in the circuit of NCP. So, if you have a look at the circuit characteristics, you'll see that the service is marked as disabled, which means that it won't do remote boot servicing. Okay, service is now enabled. So if we turn on net messages, when the machine tries to remote boot, we should see something. And there it is. The PC with this MAC address is requesting a load over the network. And that'll just won't go anywhere because we haven't installed the software yet. Now, the software we need is Pathworks, specifically version 4. Version 5 and onwards didn't have the same sort of remote boot anymore, so we had to stick to 4 or less. I prefer 4.2 because that's the latest, but I could not find that anywhere on the internet. So 4.0 is all I could find, which is good enough. Pathworks 4.0, PCSA 4.0, and the client, which is the PC software. This is the location for where you want to store the various bits of PC software. Normally you'd put them on another disk for performance reasons, but this is only a test, so they can go onto the system disks, that's fine. These are the LAD boot disks, which are container files, and that's what we boot off. And that's the install of PCSA. So have a look at there, 4.0. None of the components are started yet. What you need to do is do the configuration, utility, configure server parameters. This just sets how many workstations you want and cache sizes and things like that, which is fine. We'll go with the default. You have to do that even if you do want to use the default. And helps to get it right. Okay, it's going to add those items to mod params. Yes, append. That. No, we don't want to edit. And then we do an auto gen. And auto gen will start. Same old auto gen, I won't bore you with having to watch it. Okay, auto gen's finished. Start her up again. Now we have to start things up. You can see everything stopped. So we start up LADs. Now we'll start up the file server. Startup. Now this appears to be a bug in 4.0. It refuses to start the file server. And if you look at the log, it tells you that SP2rec is too low and you need to increase it. And it doesn't matter how many times you increase it, it keeps saying that it's too low, even when you have extreme values. So I found the way to fix this is to edit the startup procedure. Look for configure. put ignore in there. This command sets the symbols with all these values, and for some reason it doesn't set any of the symbols and it fails. So if you put ignore in there, it sets the symbols and doesn't worry about what the parameters are. If we check, everything's up and running. So now it's time to install the client software. That's the software there, PCSA Client 040. This is the system service. It'll install all sorts of DOS files in there. And that's it. So now if you look for file services, there'll be a file service there. And there's files there, DOS files. The other important thing is that if you look in here, these are the load files that are used for remote boot. So when the PC sends a remote boot request out, it sends back these files. Time to create a workstation. For our card we always use this one, DECnet, so remember that name. So to add a workstation. So what we need to do is for workstation, PC, give it an address. So adapter equals type equals DECnet, address equals 802B 303CA, size equals 720K, client equals 40. Hopefully that works. So we now have a workstation called PC with that MAC address. It'll boot off DECnet.task. There should be something in NCP as well. And if you look at the characteristics, it has a MAC address and a load task. So now if we boot the PC, it should try and load it. The only issue with that is there is nothing on the disk. So if we go into load boot, there's the disk. There's a utility called PC disk under Pathworks, which will let you look at disks. So you do that. You have to dismount it first. Do a directory and no files in that thing. So what we'll need to do is boot the PC off a floppy, which has got the appropriate network components on it, and populate that disk so that it can then boot. We will just remount the disk. Now, disk. pc.dsk is the file name and the MAC address is the service name. So you can see that there. Okay, we'll swap over to the PC now. I'll show you what happens with the remote boot. Sends the request. And this is the task that comes back from the VAXstation. So that DECnet is this. It loads up the network kernel or the scheduler. It loads up the DECnet DLL, which looks at the card. So it's found a 201, IQ5, 300IO, MEMP 2000. It then loads the last and the LAD software. So this is the minimum required to get what they call a LAD disk visible on the PC. To look at file services like the PCSA v40 service, you need DECnet loaded, you need a redirector, you need all sorts of bits and pieces loaded, but you can look at these LAD disks very simply. And it says not a system disk because there's nothing on it, as we saw. Now, I have prepared earlier a floppy which has the same stuff on it basically, the scheduler, the DLL, last and LAD, and it's a bootable disk, and then we can copy stuff onto that floppy. So we'll just boot that. So we load a thing called LAD driver, which configures the disks, and then we load the same stuff again, basically the network kernel, the DLL DECnet, last and LAD. They're exactly the same things as you see during the remote boot, except we booted off a floppy this time. So on this floppy, there is a thing called use LAD. So if we say use LAD, E drive, and the name of the service, we can see the disk on the network. So now we have network drive. I have a couple of things that I prepared earlier. This is a very basic startup. Okay, so now we have a formatted E drive sitting on the server. So well, let's try it out. Pop the floppy out and give it a go. Okay, let's boot it up. Okay, loads the scheduler, the DLL, last and lad, and then connects to the service and boots DOS. Okay, a few problems with the scripts, but see that I've booted successfully onto the network. I've created a LAD based system disk. Which is that, which has now got all the bits and pieces that I need. I think that's the problem. Try it again. And now received. It loads up the various components and started booting DOS off the boot disk. On the first boot it set up the DECnet database, so it has to reboot. And that's it. The machine is up and running. We've connected to two disks, C, which is our boot disk, and D, which is a system drive. We should be able to connect to that system service drive that the installer set up. Yes, there it is. So we've got a fully networked machine there. Once you've got things loaded, you can do nice things like use LAT to connect terminal services. Yeah. Got two logins now, one on the console, one via LAT from the PC. It's a nice terminal emulator set host. It looks very similar to a proper terminal. And all the line drawing stuff works. So what happens if you've got a card, a DECnet card without the boot ROM? Well, what you do is you get a floppy remote boot disk and you boot off that. It's not a DOS floppy, it's a specially built floppy, and it sends out the boot request if you don't have the boot ROM. So we'll just boot off that and see what happens. So it loads this off the floppy and sends the remote boot request, and then it goes on as per normal. This floppy supports DECnets, and I think it also supports 3C501, 3C502 type adapters as well. Once you've got the PC disk set up exactly the way you want it, you can then go and create a template from it. So if I have a look at the workstation here, there's my PC, and I've gone and fixed it all up and made sure it all works correctly. So if I look at a template, so I can say PCSA add template, and PC template, PC, dismounts the disk. That's a copy of it. So now if you say show me the templates, it says here is a template that I have of PC. If you look in $boot disks, you'll see the template there with .PCSA $WST. As I said before, you can go in with PC disk and go in there and have a look at the files and extract files. So you can say, you know, I want to export that, and then you can sort of edit it with scripts on VMS and then re-import it and do all that sort of stuff. Okay, so once you've got your template, you can then add other workstations. So we can say PCSA add Workstation PC2 1.222 template equals PC. That's what it was called, wasn't it? PC template. Adapter equals address equals and then that will create another PC with that template and copy some files so that it regenerates the DECnet database on boot and then mounts it. So like that, we've now got two PCs. And just keep going then. And you can create templates depending on what sort of machines you've got. If you've got machines with different hardware configurations, like you might have some with a different sort of graphics card that you need different drivers loaded. So you create a template for that. And you can create a template for a standard PC, and you create a template for different DOS versions, like a DOS 5 machine or a DOS 6 machine. So that's why you have all these templates, and then you can just create your workstations off those. Anyway, I hope you found that informative, and we will catch up with you next time. Of course, you can boot anything on remote boot.